Uh, Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
It's good to be here with you at OFAPIT Institute of Technology, the campus. I would like for you to deal with the surrender of the Europeans, because a lot of people don't understand when you say that the Europeans have surrendered, have passed the baton to the African world. What do you mean?
Yes, what I am talking about is the God order called Gagut. That's God Almighty's Grand Unified Theorem, which is an order from God that revealed all the truth, all of reality, called theorems. A reality is a theorem, meaning something that is infallibly real. You can touch it and you can see it, you can, feel it. All of such realities, which is the totality of the universe, come out of one invariant, GI, defined as God, because God is the totality of reality. With orthogonal component, defined and proven to be God. With orthogonal components, Gij, and a divergence of Gij, comma J equal to 0. That's what's the God order. In human history, or any creature's history, the whole focus or the whole thinking is about how do we fit in God's creation. What are our ranks? Are we stepchildren, or are we the favored children, the most loved children? That is the concern of every creature. And it is summarized if a segment of that creation is identified, a group of them identified to be more blessed as a group than other groups, then that group will be considered as being closer to God than any other group. And they become the chosen group. And they become the most liked group, the most favored group. And so every creature would like to, every group of creatures would like to actually feel they are the chosen group.
Are you talking about human beings? Are you talking about all creatures, animals,
Yes.
dogs, birds, cats?
That's correct. The totality of creation. Because we come in groups, or species, which is why God got revelation that says also that productivity is critical to the survival of every species. Because then if you're productive, then you keep the species going. But within those, species, groups, including human, and within the human, there's always, you can always divide, do a subgroup, okay, within a larger group, and so on and so forth. Even when it comes to a human being, for example, you could even subgroup, because you might say, gee, what about my head compared to my legs and hands? You understand me? It's always one comparison of one to the other. So I'm talking about the totality of creation, or totality of reality, which are all pieces of God. So God is the essence of God is the totality of all reality. So now God revealed this, but in terms of determining, how one can claim or reach a conclusion as to which group is the chosen group or the most beloved group. Human beings and other creatures also have arrived at the conclusion that you have to prove that through your intelligence. And intelligence is further viewed as being demonstrated by how sophisticated your war tools can be designed and built. And without war tools, just like you could do a wrestling or boxing using your physical strength to decide who is stronger, it was assumed that you could extend that through your creativity in terms of use your mind to develop tools that will help you prevail. In other words, when you can use your face and your physical power to prevail over another person, that would be one way you could say to the person, you are superior. And then if you're superior, that means God created you better, created with more power to prevail. So they've extended that to say, okay, if you can prevail with the natural human physical attributes or blessings, you also could use that same, your mind, to extend your physical capabilities in terms of designing a gun, building a gun that will help you, not only, engaging the other party at a distance, but you could actually, force him to accept you as a superior, in that process. Now, although that's not really geometrical in terms of being real, because somebody could say anything, to protect their lives, okay, to avoid their lives being destroyed. That does not mean in reality they're inferior to you, because they could go ahead and actually design a gun themselves and come back at you and catch you when you are least ready and do something also, So in reality, though, that's what has been going on in the last 2,500 years, is people thinking that they could extend the natural boundaries, immediate boundaries, by enhancing their ability to prevail over other people. And they use that, therefore, as a basis of determining they are the chosen people or the most beloved people, because once you prevail against another person, if you're able, just like if we can get hold of a tiger and put the tiger in a chain or in a zoo, then we've subdued the tiger and we can now feel superior to the tiger. A human mind have really been trying to function along that line, especially the non-blacks. The non-blacks always believed in that kind of violence. The black believed that, much less than others. So therefore, in terms of a surrender, therefore, it's about surrendering. Surrendering is your admission of a defeat or inferiority or being inferior to the other party. That's what surrender means, okay? Although it may not be genuine, it may just be a temporary thing or whatever, but the moment you surrender, you've accepted the superiority of your opponent. Mm-hmm. So, from the pharaonic days, the pyramid days, the days of the pyramids, and even before that, the Ma civilization, which came before all that, the world had known us to be the superior, the most superior of all races. And they described that with the word civilization. they called us the cradle of the civilization. Cradle where civilization began, meaning we showed intelligence. Civilization in the real sense means a display of intelligence in terms of practical and even non-practical in some cases, that convinces your opponent you are superior. Your mind works better. In fact, the military is supposed to be an aspect of that, because if you could design a gun that will force the enemy to, for fear of his life, surrender, to say, look, you are better. Although it may be temporary, but for that moment you have prevailed, okay? Because of your mind. You have a gun and he doesn't have a gun. Now, for the black people, their mind is so superior that even when without the gun, they still prevailed. They still prevailed, which is the model of God. God doesn't need a gun. God doesn't need a bomb, but God prevails. So that's the model that the black people had pursued, but it's modeled after God now, which is the ultimate, really. So the victory, what appeared to be a victory over the last 2,500 years for the non-blacks, was one that was based on this gun victory. Gun victory that would, for the moment, make them look like they're prevailing and they are better. They overran our land, the Kemetic land, and threw us out. Those who could not stay to be run by animals moved away. That's how my people moved down, and so on and so forth. And allowed them to have the land, knowing fully well they cannot do much with it because they have no brains. They're not in any competition whatsoever. And they pursued, from the north and the south. And so, because we have been pursued from the north and the south, most of our concentration of our original stuff, at least in ideas and language and all that, were concentrated in between the north and the south, maybe in the middle, which is where, the Gala Kingdom is, and other kingdoms in Ghana, and, all the way to the west and all the way to the east, east, and so on. So the reality within that terrorism era was concentrated in that area. So because prevailing over other creatures is an indication of not only victory, but also that you are superior. And because the non-blacks believe in military techniques to accomplish that goal, a physical military techniques. But then again, the mere fact of the military techniques themselves requires intelligence. The intelligence is transmitted or translated into the sophistication of the military weapon, as well as its destructive power. But the black people have known that in spite of that reality, black people knew one thing, that if you become too destructive, you defeat your purpose. Okay? See, if you take a gun and you say, look, I'm going to shoot you, you better say I'm superior and do what I tell you. There are at least two choices. One has, the person you're talking to has, in the minimum, two choices, which is, you could say, okay, I surrender. And that happens every day in our lives, you know, where you see a police can put your hands up, okay? The person who is being asked to put hands up has more than one choice. He may decide to not put their hands up. And so therefore you might be forced to shoot him. And even when you shoot him, you might still ask him to, but he may still refuse. So if you carry that along, you might be forced to kill the person. But after you've killed the person, you've lost your victory. You can't tell a dead person to carry out your orders anymore. So what have you accomplished? Nothing. Therefore, the power of the weapon has a limit. It is therefore the destructivity of the weapon has a limit. So, which is why the Africans refuse to concentrate on the destructive power of a military system. So instead, they use the God's approach to indicate to you by looking you in the eye and give you a theorem that says, I am your superior, because not only can I do what you are doing better, I can destroy you, quicker than you can yourself. So therefore, and because I would like you to not only know that I am superior, but that you continue to see me as your superior forever. And you have to do things my way. That's the African approach. It's not always totally successful in a given little time space. But because the statements themselves are correct, the actual theorems, over a period of time, it will play out like it was stated. That's what Göttinger's surrender did. 2,500 years ago, they came on our shores, the Greeks and all, and overran our land. The goal was to steal everything we have and then say, well, they are the superior, they're the chosen race. So what we did was an equivalent to a retreat in a military strategy, in a military language. We retreated to get ready for them. We taught, non-blacks the God's way of proving that you are superior. But obviously they couldn't comprehend it, so therefore they used their own method. For the moment, it looks as if they are conquering, so-called conquering. Kind of like a tiger conquering a human being. What does that mean? A tiger conquering a human being is what non-blacks did in so-called conquering black people. So then you have to analyze what a conquering tiger does with the entity he conquered. There's only one thing a tiger can do.
Eat it.
You destroy your people you conquered, your entity you conquered, or the second choice, which is, which negates the whole process, is you let them go. You go sleep and the people walk away. That's the bottom line. And so people who you claimed you conquered will come back with the tranquilizer and they'll pump you with it and they'll diffuse or clip your claws and take out your teeth. The tiger's teeth can be taken out, or the fangs and all that could be actually, do you understand? The claws can be clipped. You could reduce the tiger to, with all the power, you could reduce the tiger to nothing, to be ineffective totally in attacking anybody, because you take out the tools, the physical tools, and that's it. Okay, if you don't want to do that, you just inject with a tranquilizer. He sleeps, and you understand. So you're in charge. So the brains, the intelligence, is the actual superiority. So it wasn't the gun that was used, or the horsebacks and all this. Well, we conquered. You conquer. How many times do you have to conquer a place to when is it going to end? Because people are going to rise up. Okay, after you conquer them, they're going to get better guns. Or even a small gun, they will challenge you again, especially if they feel you are no match for them in intelligence. That's what has been the story of the black people for the last 2,500 years. And all kinds of techniques were used that were not utilized in gun, which is really the mind, which is the best of the guns. Okay? So therefore, the Indians were attacked, although not to the level there, but they were almost they became extinct. They almost liquidated them, they destroyed them. But black people, because of their brain power, could not be eliminated. That's a challenge. Not only could they not be eliminated, but because of their superiority, just like the tiger story, the tiger cannot do anything. So the Europeans can't do anything with the black people other than bow down to the black people. So what happened then, after all these 2,500 years, in 1990, a revelation, which is what we call Gagut, the God order, came around, and it says, all right, it's time for us to now go and tell the non-blacks, the God order, which is that the black race are the chosen people, the ones that must prevail. That's what happened in 1990. And it came so loud and so clear and so powerful. Not a single, none of the bombs individually or collectively in all the silos, and both here in Russia and Germany, and none of those could take on the revelation and demolish it. They wanted to, they were desperate. They wanted to use those, but they were totally ineffective. They couldn't touch the equation. The revelation came out in the equation G-I-J, comma, J equal to 0. And once that came out, and it's verified infallibly to come from God as a God order, declare, in other words, God spoke through that equation, declaring who are the chosen people, which is the black race. Once that happened, then, and there was no way any bomb could touch that, it became clear to Jim Crow it's time to surrender. So the surrender began really with their overall ruler, the President of the United States, Clinton, pumping money into Yale to study the impact of that revelation, G.I.J. equal to 0, in terms of how do the non-blacks rank. It wasn't a question of whether the black people are the most intelligent race anymore, the chosen race anymore. Is how close are the non-blacks to us? So they pumped money into Yale to determine that. And in effect, the formula, the solution to the formula was in effect, unbeknown to Yale, was in effect used to determine how close the non-blacks are to the black people in terms of the love of God for the black people, in terms of intelligence. And so that was what came out in that search for how well other people, the non-blacks, compare with black people in terms of the love from God. Okay. And so the result was consistent, a little conservative but consistent. It proved that the black race, of course, are on top of the list with the 28 intelligence strands, and the non-blacks having 19.
But they interpreted that all Europeans have 6 DNA series, and Africans had 9. How do you get your figure?
Yes. What the interpretation comes from a ratio of 19 to 28 comes out roughly to be equivalent with 6 to 9. That's where that came from. And the common denominator, in other words, when you're comparing things, you can always take a ratio of the numbers you're comparing. And it's what is called proportionality or dilation. It's called dilation. You can dilate things into smaller shapes provided that it's consistent. That's what was done. Because if you divide 19 by 3, you get 6 and a third. If you divide 28 by 3, you also get 9 and a third. That's where, and 9 and a third can be roughly estimated to be 9. And then 6 and a third can be also estimated to be 6. That's where the 9 and 6 come from. So that is, where the 9 to 6, comes from. But the original raw data was 28 intelligence strands for black people, and then 19 for the rest, the non-blacks. And so from there, a lot of other things were done. The question was not whether who is the most intelligent race or the chosen race anymore, is the implications of that. And in 2004, a cryptic message came out that based on that reality. Can I?
Keep going.
Oh, okay. That reality, which says, a cryptic message were talking about, well, what happens now that black people are the chosen race, because the God order says a black man, God ordained a black man with the ultimate intelligence, etas of infinity. And where etas of Ben exactly represents intelligence. And the N is the level of intelligence, which in effect is consistent with the measurement in Yale. The level of intelligence is what the DNA intelligence strands represent.
Professor Oyibo, we were discussing the Gauthier surrender and how that symbolically represented the passing on of the baton from the European race to the white race, or to the African race, from the European race to the African race. How does Gauthier selecting your work, the unified field theory, Gij, J equals 0, how does that symbolically represent the European surrender to African people?
Yes, and what I was trying to say earlier was taking you back to on a chronological path and geometry, so you could get a sense of that. The Germans have been in the forefront of the European supremacy since the German takeover in the 1700s of England, and they ushered in a German royalty, replacing the original English monarchy. Among those was the royalties, the kings were King George II, in the early 1700s. And they took over England because of what happened with Sir Isaac Newton in terms of a formula. And then colonized England so as to take control of the formula GM1M2 minus FR2 squared, FR squared is equal to 0. It took control of that because they were searching for the same formula themselves. So, and since they had partial success because Johannes Kepler, found the path which is mathematically important in terms of determining. Because if you could deal with emotion either by finding the force behind it or the path of the motion. Okay? So, because they're related. So Kepler found the path, elliptical path, in the Kepler's laws. Kepler was a German. But Einstein found the force, which is the formula, GM1M2 minus FR squared is equal to 0. But Germans wanted to be in total control of that dynamics, the force and the path, and so colonized England. But once England was colonized, this is extremely important for those who like to understand what casually is referred to as the so-called European supremacy in terms of the geometry of what is referred to as European supremacy. So because the Germans took over England, the capital of European supremacy had to move back to England, Germany.
Can I interrupt just for clarification?
Yes.
How did that formula enable Germany to take over or to defeat England?
Okay. Yeah, well, the one with the formula is the one with the revelation. That's a symbolism of formulas. Formula contains information, as in revelation. That's what formula does, it reveals. If you have a formula for a straight line, y minus at or y minus 2t is equal to 0, it's equal to gij, for example, that's a formula. That tells you a path, it predicts you, it's a revelation on a path that something, can be on, which is a straight line. To be y is equal to 2t. And every time you can tell where the projectile that's on that path is going to be. If you specify the time, you will know exactly where it's going to be. So that's a prediction, that's a revelation. A real revelation is specified by formula, as opposed to a claim that is not proven. That's what differentiates Gagut from, religious prophets. I'm a God's prophet, not a religious prophet, because my prophecy is absolutely precisely correct. There's no guesswork in my prophecy. But the other types, and that's the ultimate, the next after that is God. God's self actually speaking. You understand me? God has spoken through me. In other words, for example, God says, I'm on a straight line. Yes, you'll be able to verify that every period, because you will plug in the t and you'll find me, 2 times t, I will be there. Do you understand me? There's no guesswork. Don't say, oh gee, I'm missing by 1 inch. No, you get it exactly. Do you understand? So that is what a formula represents. A formula represents a revelation from God in geometry that you can see the verification in real, in the transformed space-time. You can see it. Now, other people can come and claim they have a revelation from God, but without a formula. Only Gagut has a revelation. Of course, the other science is wherever their revelation comes from God, they will have to determine that from experiment. But experiment can be never-ending kind of situation. It's not quite sane. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
So back again, the formula is the ultimate way to prove. And if the formula is wrong, of course, it disproves. But if the formula is correct, then it is the surest verification. The revelation contained in that formula comes from God. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, therefore, if somebody is endowed and blessed with a God order giving that person or a people a revelation that can be represented by a formula which is proven to be correct, a revelation that was not known before, but proven to be correct, as in it came directly from God, it came from God, then that particular individual is understood to have a special
Relationship
with God and a special connectivity with God. Do you understand? In other words, you're not just doing a guesswork, you have a precise revelation from God, and it's not just based on faith. The world can see, even people who don't understand mathematics can feel it is an absolute truth. Just like in KTL, after they listen to my presentation, their soul can feel the vibrations of the revelation. And Red Pill got on the show and he said, I can feel it in my soul, as demonstrated by the sheer exuberance of your presentation verifies it comes from God.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once that is certified, nobody has any doubts anymore. Anybody that has been able to certify a new revelation is coming directly from God or coming from God through the messenger, then that verifies the messenger's position as having a very special relationship with God. Do you understand?
Yes, you're saying only God can bring about in an individual this revelation, because God speaks through the individual in mathematics. Mathematics is the language of God.
That's good. That's right. So if God reveals you that mathematics and it precise what you say come from God exactly like the formula says, then you are a symbolism of God. Mm-hmm. Because the other people are not able to do that. So you are translating God to the other people, the masses. And all you need is one particular member of a group to be privileged with such a connectivity with God. One is all you need in your group to testify that you as a group have a special relationship with God.
Can I ask you, how is it that one says mathematics is the language of God? Can that be proven?
Yes. 2 + 1 - 3 is a statement by God. Because as 2 + 1 - 3 is equal to 0, that's God's order. That's a God order. Because you know that 2 + 1 - 3 is equal to 0. The 0 is the symbol of God. 0 means where it came from, the reference point. Got it? where it came from, the zero. Anytime you have something on the left that's equal to 0 and is proven to be 0, that's infallible proof it came from God because it's 0. That's 0. That's why you have the Gij, comma J equal to 0. And it's proven to be perfectly correct. That means it came from God. But the ultimate difference in terms of Gagut is that not only does that come from God, is the totality of reality revealed through that formula, and it all came from God. That's how God endowed me with the ultimate intelligence. There's nothing beyond that, and that's important for you. So you rise up to higher level, so that then you're not talking to. You can't compare me with Einstein with a few formulas. You can't compare me with Isaac Newton with a few formulas, or Gauss with a few formulas. That's what happened in Göttingen. The celebration of Gauss really was an excuse to celebrate Gagut. Because that's what Gauss was looking for. And sure enough, he accomplished a lot. You know, he could be considered as a polymath because he had contributions in various directions, okay, of applied mathematics. In other words, there is geometry, and then the rest is application of geometry. Geometry, God's understanding, God's learning, God science, God information, God. So therefore, geometry. Therefore, now geometry is mathematics, or ma, we call it ma. The Arabs add the teeth part of it, ma'at, ma'de. You know, they got to be actually ma'de. In other words, that's intelligence. The Arabs will call it ma'at. The ma'atikos. The ekos part is what was put in by the Greeks. But it's our word, it's our original word. Okay, now, so therefore, now, so because
ma'at is our original word?
No, ma is our word. Ma means intelligence or knowledge or understanding of an absolute truth or proven truth, which is understanding of reality. You are a proven truth because you hear, you have your boundaries, everything that constitutes you as Minister Clemson Brown. You hear, you are a theory, you are a reality. Okay? But you come out of Gij, you have a Gij. Do you understand? And Gij for you is Minister Brown minus Minister Brown is that reference point. You came from God. That's why you're a reality. 0, Minister Brown minus Minister Brown is a 0. Just like 2 plus 1 minus 3 is equal to 0. Just like Lady Brown minus Lady Brown is equal to 0. Do you understand me? Only realities are described by such things. That's what part of the revelation through Gagut. Only realities obey that law. A lie will be 2 plus 1 minus 3 equal 5. That's a lie. That's not reality. That doesn't come from God. There's no way you're going to do anything with that to arrive at the reference point that is 0. It's absolutely impossible. If you bring the 5 to the left-hand side, you will never get a 0. Do you understand?
Oh, yeah.
The only thing that is a 0 is when it is reality. And that's a piece of God is reality. So therefore, because you come from Gij, comma J equal to 0, and God has endowed in my brains the eta sub n, which is the solutions, all the fundamental solutions to the Gij, comma J equal to 0, every reality comes out of Gij, comma J equal to 0, again, God. And because God has given me the solutions in terms of eta sub n, the solutions then becomes intelligence. That's the fundamental solutions become a measure of intelligence. It is that intelligence that I can understand you with. I look at your demeanor, I know pretty what's going on in your head. I know everything about you because I have all the intelligence to do that. because I have all the etas of being. I didn't just have one or two, I have the totality of it. So where I'm reconstructing what's on your mind or your system, and I run into difficulty, I use additional ones to reconstruct. So it's like you're sculpting. What do you do when you do sculpting? You take a piece of clay and then you try to construct a reality. Do you understand me? Yeah, but by and large, you are not, you see, what you construct though is mostly external.
Correct.
You don't do internal. I do internal. And yours is eyeballing. You not do it, oh yeah. See, the beauty, the specific gift of an artist is their sync with reality. Do you understand me? It's an extraordinarily brilliant blessing from God that you could, visualize reality and actually try to reproduce it. Do you understand? But your feel for that reality in terms of reproduction of it is approximate. Many times it's way off in terms of its geometry. But your presentation you can create an illusion to make it real. You understand? My Polish technical drawing teacher, I used to call it, he had the terminology, says, private job. He calls it private job. In other words, where you understand, because in technical drawing, we draw reality. Do you understand me? You draw reality exactly through projections.
Yes.
But when an artist does it, a freehand, you do a free-handed, okay? You try to bring out but you are gifted in doing that. Other people, I can't do a fine art like you would do it. But I can do a technical drawing, what you do, No, but Gagut is much higher than that, because even a technical drawing, although you can always do every internal part, you can project it, Do you understand me? Technical drawing. Einstein had difficulty with technical drawing. That's why he had difficulty getting admission into Zurich, because that's a standard. You have to pass that test to get into any technical field, okay? Especially in very advanced areas. But anyway, so the bottom line, therefore, is all of realities are inside of Gagut. The only way you could verify it's a reality is if you take an entity from itself, because it's a reality, it's a piece of God and comes from God. The reference, God is the reference point. Before anything, there was God. In the beginning, there was God. As he said, that's one part of the so-called holy book that is correct. So, therefore, if you subtract everything that God created, you will get God. You subtract it from themselves, you will end up with God.
You end up with zero.
That's the reference point. See, the zero. Good question. The zero, see, in other words, the zero is a reference point. When you left your house, you made your house a reference point. So you started counting the mileage on your odometer from your house to know how much mileage it is from your house over here. Do you understand? The odometer, the actual odometer that was on your car started when the car was released to you when you purchased it, okay? It was zero. So it started from the time of this giving you the car, okay? If it was a parking lot, that's where it started. So you call it that's when it was zero, okay? Zero, and then you began counting. So, but you see, the zero there, like in any other case, is actually your reference point where you began. Do you understand?
Yes.
Reference point. And if you're counting a distance, Okay, so you counting that distance where you started from as a reference point. That is the zero. Do you understand me? So zero is not what you've been told by Jim Crow, who do not understand better, as being nothing, because there's no such a thing as nothing. Zero is a reference point. Let me go over that again. A zero is a reference point. Now, when you count in chickens, suppose you want to count chickens around here right now, you will say, well, there's no chicken here. So you say zero. Do you understand me? So, but you see, guess what? You're not really precise in saying that, because chickens eat the grass. And some of them have eaten this grass already. Okay? In as much as there's grass here, which is part of the constitution with chicken, there's chicken here. So therefore, all you're saying, there's no chicken here right now, the ones that the form you're looking for is not here. That's what you're simply saying. So, but it's not here means the reference point right now is here. It's not the one that you know. Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay.
Keep going.
Okay, so therefore, now, so that's dynamics of zero. Zero, therefore, is God, because that's the original reference point. When no material thing existed, there was God. Okay, just like, when you say there's zero chicken here, you really mean the thing you're looking for is not here, but there are other things that are here. There cannot be nothing, at any point in time, because in space-time, there's no such a thing as absence of space-time. Space-time always exists. So anyway, so it is within that context that every reality is demonstrated by, when you subtract such a reality from itself, you get where the reality came from, which is God. So therefore, that is the proven dynamics. And because Gagut, through the revelation from God, says, okay, every reality away from itself, subtracted from itself, is zero. That's a universal law. Now, and if you, take a change of that reference point, which is God, that's a change in God, is zero, which is what the Gij command equal to zero is. Now, but because that's an absolute truth, a proven truth called a theorem, verifies it comes from the only source of an absolute truth, which is God. So therefore, God not only represents every reality, but because it came from God, it represents all of reality absolutely, in terms of being infallibly representing absolute reality. So now, the Germans, when they saw the scare from Newton, they weren't even thinking Newton was going to be competitive with Kepler and the other Polish guy, Copernicus. They were, competing and all that. German, Polish, and an Englishman. And so they colonized England. They took over England.
And how though?
Well, how? They marched in England and through the cooperation of the English people, throughout the royalty that was in existence before that, says it's time for you to disappear. And the Hessians, Hessians moved in and they said, okay, now from now on it's going to be German royalty. The royalty that existed before, the stewards or whatever they were in England, were deposed, were thrown out. And the Germans, foreign entities from different countries, came over and took over the royalty in England.
Militarily.
Everything else you can think of, they just walked in and took over.
Okay.
Oh yeah, man. So therefore, now as soon as that happened, they took over the control of the formula and then shifted the capital of the country to Germany. The Martin, Queen Elizabeth's family, the George, King George the first and the second and all that, from Hanover, Germany. Hanover is a few miles from Göttingen University. So as soon as King George II, was confident about the takeover of England, colonizing England, they didn't want Cambridge anymore to be the headquarters of learning, certainly no headquarters of mathematics, because mathematics is the ultimate, just like what I went over. Mm-hmm. The ultimate level of knowledge, or the highest level of knowledge, is mathematical knowledge of things. Mm-hmm. Okay, intelligent, proven. And the ultimate level of knowledge is Gagut. Mm-hmm. It's the ultimate. You can't go past that because it has everything there. So therefore, he founded the replacement university for Cambridge University, which is Göttingen University. It has his name on it. King George University, or King August George University of Göttingen. So they invested heavily in the mathematics department, since the mathematics is the ultimate, way to acquire any knowledge. And Gauss was on the horizon, just waiting to be called in. Boom, and gave him all the resources, everything. He surpassed Newton in pure mathematics in a very short period of time. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, by applications of his dynamics, he became a polymath, just like Newton himself, and way before them, the first polymath is Imhotep, way back when, okay, a black man. Now, so England was taking over, Germany becomes the headquarters of the European supremacy. The university is the bottom line. The administration, the seat of the administration is not as important. Mm-hmm. Göttingen became the #1 headquarters, the headquarters of mathematics, edging Cambridge out. Okay? Since Gauss replaced Newton, in his base, Göttingen replaced Cambridge University, or Oxbridge. Mm. So therefore, every development, the Second World War, the First World War and all that, where Germans were in the lead, they declared the war or set up a situation where they're ready for the war before everybody else, was being masterminded from Göttingen University. Professor Prandtl, Ludwig Prandtl, I think that was his first name is Ludwig, last name is Prandtl. Prandtl did the boundary layer theory, but before that there was Molenbroek with the hodogram that you did in your previous dynamics. They all worked towards getting into aerospace, how to overcome the distance barrier by flying, okay, and flying at the speed. So you could see the enemy from the air, and you bomb them, you do all kinds of things. The rockets came about. In fact, the Second World War, some of the first rockets were fired from not too far from Göttingen, and it landed in London and killed a few people. And as a matter of fact, there was some kind of rumors that the English had no idea what the rocket was, and they were trying. You understand? When they landed, they thought it was some kind of toy, so they ran close to it and got blown away. They come and see the German wonder, that kind of thing. There were things like that, that were. So the bottom line, they were very sophisticated because they concentrated on using Göttingen as a base of human intelligence to, prove and sustain not only the European supremacy, but the German leadership of that European supremacy. Okay? It became the intellectual headquarters of the European supremacy. Berlin, of course, was higher up also, Berlin, but Göttingen was more so. Berlin was the seat of the German government. But once you're in charge on intellectual level, then you're in charge of everything. So the German was a symbol not only, Gauss was a symbol not only of the European supremacy, but also of the German leadership of that European supremacy. They took over literally everywhere. In America, they were in charge. Without Göttingen, there's no NASA. Without Göttingen, there wasn't anything, you know. And so now, what happened then was, in 1985. First of all, in 1983, the AIAA journal that's the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics journal, is the most prestigious aeronautics scientific journal in the world. It still is. But they were mostly developed by Germans and everything else, and a lot of money from America. But it's based here in America. In 1983, I published research journal papers more than any other human being in that journal. That's the most prestigious, very most prestigious. I published 4 papers in that journal, more than any other human. There was no
in
time.
1 year?
In 1983.
1 year.
That's correct. 4 papers. That's public record. Yeah, all you need is go to the libraries. You could even do it on the internet. You might do for money. And you go into the December issue of the AIAA journal. You know, you ask for the December issue. The last page, or second to the last page, is the tally of who published, and that goes to tell you. Of the 12 issues, they can tally everybody that published in the journal. That gives you a sense of how prestigious it is, right? 1 or 2 pages can list every person that published in the journal in the whole world. That's how strict the reviews are. In 1 or 2 pages, they list everybody that published in the whole year will be listed there. And then they will give the numbers of their papers. And if you go against my name, you see 4 papers. Not a single other person from Harvard, MIT, Göttingen, Cambridge, Oxford, Johannesburg, everywhere, Japan, you understand me? Match that record. The next number or highest was 3. Nobody on the 4 level. That's 83.
What kind of review qualifies you to publish in that paper?
Because the most rigorous is definitely one of the most rigorous reviews. That's why there's so few people publishing in it. There are very, very few. And very few can get in. In other words, what I publish in 1 year will make a professor famous in MIT for all of his professional career. If you're an MIT, big professor, your whole life publications in terms of actual paper publication in AIAA, do you understand me? If you have up to 4, that will be incredible. That will be very, very recognized. And usually, it is done in terms of groups, people bound together, the whole department literally can come in and 1 paper and so on and so on. Because all you need is just to say, I have published a paper in the AIAA journal, and people have a lot of respect for you. And in part of the recommendation letter from Professor Livio Librescu, he will give you a sense of what it is. You need to read it.
I have.
Okay, yeah. Well, you read it, and he will tell. He said, look, this guy has published in this journal, and he will give you a sense of what the journal means. But in any case, so that got a global attention. That was the preliminaries before Gagut showed up, 1983. So now, everybody noted that in the scientific community, especially aerospace scientific community. And in 1985, I was invited to Germany. And it's one of the most, how can I say it, most memorable, most spiritual trip for me in my life. One of the most, for sure. That was when I met my father for the last encounter on the physical plane. But I was invited. Right from, even when I was preparing for my lectures, I could see the glory of God almost everywhere I turned. The Department of Defense were playing a role, everything. In fact, when they were sending us, that was still, the Cold War still, supposedly, in fact. And the Department of Defense had to, they had a delegation that followed us to Germany. And they were watching everybody. It was very difficult to socialize, actually. But anyway, as I was going, I paid for what you call economy class. But again, mysteriously, I ended up in the second class.
You mean first class?
No, I didn't know. It was second class. That is the business class. Okay? They upgraded me. I don't know why that happened, but again, and they were serving champagne and so on and so forth, and it was a party. So I saw a lot of, and I was listening to music by Earth, Wind and Fire. The lead vocalist there had something with some English thing, and that was being played and brought in a lot of memories and so on and so forth. And then arrived in Germany, the University of Göttingen, the second most popular school. The first is Göttingen. I was in the second most popular, which is the University of Aachen, Germany. That's where I was, the conference was taking place. And I was asked to deliver 3 lectures.
Was anybody else asked to deliver that many lectures?
No, absolutely not. It matched the IAA record. As a matter of fact, the guy who was interviewing me was Professor Otto, O-T-T-O. And and he said, he came in and he said, well, Oyibo is a noted American mathematician, and I jump in and try to get some little humor by saying, well, I'm an African, I'm an African mathematician. And I turned around and there was no laughing. People look like SS. With their faces, grim faces, like, and I was hoping I was getting a laugh, but it didn't happen. So anyway, so I let that slide. And then he went on to say, well, the same person had published more than any of us in the AIAA journal in 1983. Otto said that, and again, they were getting more furious than ever, Then he said, well, guess what? He repeated the same thing again in this conference because he has more lectures in this conference than any of us in this conference. At such a point, I thought they were going to lynch me now. Well, the hall of about 500 presenters, do you understand? And I'm the only black person in the crowd. I said, sure, I'm gone for today. You understand? But it didn't happen like that. In the crowd where Librescu led the delegation.
Yes.
Yeah, Professor Librescu led the delegation from Israel. Now, he was a Holocaust survivor from Romania. And some people talk about their family members, their parents being Holocaust survivors. No, he himself was a survivor from Romania. And then ended up in Israel. And what he said to me, if I remember correctly, was so touching. He said, After my last lecture, they came over and lined up. I was still on the podium and they came over and lined up. And that's when I really felt I was going to be lynched. In fact, when they turned off the light, it looked so dim. I said, wow, this is going to be technical. I'm going to be lynched right in this way. And nobody will even know, because nobody knew, no black person that I knew I was there except my family. And a similar thing happened later on in Copper Mountains in Colorado. So they walk over to me. I didn't know what he looked like then, Professor Lebreski. He led a delegation from Israel to come and meet with me, because they had invited me to come to Israel so many times and it wasn't possible. You know, the authorities won't allow me to go. And so they decided they were going to catch up with me in Germany. But he said to me something like, well, since my experience as a Holocaust survivor, I vowed never to visit Germany or any of the Nazi-controlled areas ever again. But because of you, I not only changed my policy on that issue, I brought in a delegation to come and welcome you in Germany. I think that was one of the greatest honors I ever felt I had, you know, at least from non-blacks. And I was simply overwhelmed, totally overwhelmed. But anyway, Otto was particularly, I mean, he just gave these SS looking Germans and the other Europeans exactly what they didn't want to hear, but he told them, because he introduced me, and of course I gave my presentation. Ironically, one of my presentations was on holograph, and you know, I can't begin to tell you, it was such a high spirit. You understand, it on so many levels.
What is the holograph?
The holograph is a transformation of an equation from what is called the physical space. What you see here is a physical space of space-time. That's a physical space. You have 3 space dimensions and a time dimension. That's called a physical space. Most of the equations are written in that physical space, how things vary with the space and so on and so forth, so space-time. Because of mathematics before Gagut that limited the development of so-called mathematics and modeling or application of mathematics, equations in a physical space for a particular phenomenon like a flow field could come out, or many times came out, as a very complicated nonlinear equations. And when it's nonlinear, it simply means you really can't do much with it. Even if you find specific equation solutions, you can't do any generalization. You can't do much. It's so highly restricted. So nobody wants equations that are nonlinear. On the other hand, most of realistic equations describing reality turned out to be nonlinear. So if you're successful in coming up with equations that made sense, you are caught up in a situation of trying to get solutions out of that equation because of their non-linearities. You can't solve them. So what holograph did that brought Germans into real limelight at a certain stage was they have equations that were needed to understand the flow field around an environment where you could fly an airplane, to model a wing and all that. The equation was called the potential flow equation. In the physical space, the space-time, it is non-linear. However, you can transform it into a velocity space. Just like space-time are orthogonal. Orthogonal means they are independent of each other. The space, both the 3 space dimensions and the time are orthogonal, meaning perpendicular, they're not dependent, they have no relationship with each other. The same way the velocities can be orthogonal. And later on, Gagut will generalize that everything can be fully represented by the orthogonal components, everything. But during that time, they were trying to see how they could solve this nonlinear equation they need in order to design an airplane wing, an aircraft. And then Molenbroek in Germany, Professor Molenbroek, came up with the transformation into the velocity space, the flow-filled velocities or speeds, orthogonal speeds, and transformed that nonlinear equation in a physical space into a linear equation in the hodograph space. The hodograph simply means velocity space. Hodograph space means, hodograph in other words means velocities. That's the real meaning of hodograph is velocities. So hodograph space means velocity space. So Molenbroek did that, and hey, Germany was well known. That's in addition to Gauss. So there was a build-up that overwhelmed the rest of Europe in terms of German superiority and leadership. So the hodograph became big. One of the German trained scientists called Sir James Lighthill. Sir James. He was knighted. He sat on the Newton's chair before, I think there may have been one between him and Hawking.
Stephen Hawking.
That's right. Lighthill sat in that chair maybe 20 years before Stephen Hawking came up. But he was from Germany. And the contribution to science that qualified him for the Newton chair was the hodograph.
Two-dimensional.
Two-dimensional, that's correct. He took the hodograph beyond Molenbroek, but he was German. The rumor that he was a German Jew, but he was German. Okay, that's Lighthill, Sir James Lighthill. So because of his contribution to the hodograph, he was knighted Sir James Lighthill, and then was bestowed the highest chair in the European world, or academics, or one of them at least, was the Newton chair, the location professorship. So professorship, the Einstein professorship or the location professorship went into a person who made contribution for applied mathematics to aeronautics. That's Sir James Lighthill. And so German had a long history of reverence to the hodograph as an application of mathematics. And so when in 1985 they reviewed my abstract and asked me to deliver a lecture on hodograph, that was definitely, and God was taking the hodograph from the days of Molenbroek to the Lighthills to any number of other legendary contributions, but still stayed within the two-dimensional. I was coming back 102 years later on after Molenbroek's. Because Molenbroek was in 1876, around 1918. Anyway, roughly, I was there over 100 years later. And I was taking Molenbroek's two-dimensional hodograph to the next level, which is three-dimensional. And it was reviewed and understood to have enough merit for me to present it and have a further scrutiny. That was a biggie. if that was all the paper that I was presenting in Germany, inside of Germany where holograph originated from, do you understand me? And in the the top university in Germany, that was some big dynamic. So after the introduction, I gave my lectures, guys.
Now, going from that two-dimensional holograph to the three-dimensional.
Yes.
What could you do with the three-dimensional you couldn't do with the two-dimensional? Why was that such a big thing?
Yeah, it was a big thing because the two-dimensional is too restricted in terms of a real wing is 3 dimensions. So you're designing with 2 dimensions that needs to fly in a 3-dimensional space. That's a restriction that was forced on scientists because of their inability to understand the mathematics and get it in the 3 dimensions. So 3 dimension was a giant leap. In other words, although what I presented in Germany was adding a time dimension, which is still the 3 dimension, okay? Later on I will do the 3 space dimension. So it gives you an ability to design a more realistic wing. That's what the 3 dimension, because the real space is in the list 3 space dimensions and a time. 4-dimensional space is what every human can relate to. Okay? That's, in other words, say, if you pick a point, there are 3 orthogonal coordinates I can describe. This is one, and then, if this is on the ground, then there's one that goes out of my hand. That's the 3rd dimension. Now, that's as much as we could actually visualize. We have 2, plane, this and that, and then one that comes that is perpendicular to all 2 of them. Okay, both 2 of them, but perpendicular to their plane. That's a 3rd dimension. Okay, I can't actually. It's more. This would also do it. Okay, this would do it. Okay, you see, this and this are orthogonal, 90 degrees between them. But this one is orthogonal to both of them. The 3rd one here.
What that represent?
Well, that's another dimension. This is a dimension. This is a dimension, and this is a dimension. These are the 3 spatial dimensions. Do you understand? Okay, now, in addition, there's a time element, because where you put their origin is arbitrary. And time kind of, deal with that arbitrariness, because you could put it anywhere, really, So anyway, so there's 3 space and 1 time that we can visualize immediately. Now, technically, the time, which is a reference point, can break down into any number, possibly, once you begin to realize certain other dynamics that might be there, and even the space could be expanded. But in the minimum, we have a 3 spatial and 1 time. So if you have equation that only is 2-dimensional, that is very highly restricted. Do you understand? Because when you design that plane, and it is you can only see the physics in 2 dimensions. When it begins to fly, that physics that was 2-dimensional becomes 3-dimensional. So that messes up everything that you've done. Therefore, there is a need to have a 3-dimensional photograph. And that's what was revealed as a prelude to Gagut.
Now, Professor,
Yeah.
what can a 3-dimensional wing design do that a 2-dimensional wing design couldn't do? I'm just trying to get the dynamics in terms of
importance of the 3 dimension.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Well, like I said, a 2-dimensional drag when you put it into an estimate, that means, for example, you use the two-dimensional photograph to estimate the lift and the drag. That is, those are parameters that are needed in aircraft design. The lift will give you a sense of how many passengers you can carry, or how many military load or war weaponry or bombs you can carry. Do you understand?
Yes.
And fly safely. Do you understand? So when you use a two-dimensional theory to make that estimate, but because when you fly that airplane, it's going to be three-dimensional, the additional dimension, and time, the additional dimensions are going to bring in additional physics, which was not incorporated in the original estimate. Do you understand? And by and large, such an error tends to be non-conservative, meaning that it will mess up your design. The actual lift may not be able to sustain the flight. The flight, what you design may not be able to carry through in this real space environment. Do you understand? And you could endanger lives of people. Do you understand? So, in other words, there's a safety issue. There's performance issue, because performance, you have to overcome the drag in order to be able to do performance. Okay.
Right.
So if you have an underestimated, drag, the drag gets very big. You'll be unable to maneuver your airplane. You cannot do any real performance.
At speeds that.
And of course, speed is part of that performance parameter. So that is what makes having equations that are accurate in a real space-time is important. And so that is so therefore, it is for that. Yes, go ahead.
No, I was just trying, and see, I had heard that you were responsible for wing design and the most sophisticated aircraft in the American arsenal of fighter jets. I was trying to get you to articulate that so that you can see it and understand what it is that you did that brought about the most sophisticated wing design in the American arsenal of fighter jets.
Well, that comes from the history of the Germans. With the hodograph, the Germans were able, get themselves ready for transonic flows, especially transonic flows, meaning flying airplanes that are around near the speed of sound. For you to really, participate in a military operation using aircraft, a military operation by the Air Force, you have to be able to not only fly, but fly at very high speeds. And the higher the speed, the bigger the challenges of the design. So one of the most serious reasons for glorifying God for the hodograph equation is that the equations that are being transformed into linear space using the hodograph are for high speed speed regimes of design, transonic flow. So a military can boast of their speed, air military. It's their speed because the faster you can, the faster you could outdo the enemy. You want to bomb very quickly. You want to attack the enemy very quickly and maneuver around them so they don't get to hit you. Okay? So speed is extremely important. So therefore, to design a plane that is not only safe but maneuverable for the military, therefore, requires your use of this hodograph. And the transonic is a particular challenging. You're going from subsonic flight speeds to supersonic. And in the realm of, in that region is the weirdest kind of region in terms of the design. Okay? You have to go past the sound barrier. That, and people before used to think, boy, if a human being goes through a sound barrier, they will never hear again. There's all these mythical things about, going. So, and the same, sure enough, the equations are that complicated. They defy all kinds of treatment. If you try to simplify it, the thing breaks down when you reach the speed of sound. That's why Sir James Lighthill can score so much to be highlighted in the highest positions in academic chairs in Cambridge University. You understand me? Because of his contribution in the photograph. So you have a black man coming in direct into the realm that barely, you understand me, the Southern Europeans were not even really allowed to make inroad going to that kind of realm. And you're nice and black, and you come and you bust it through, and you're recording paper journals and having paper reviewed, and people are saying, yes, man, we haven't seen anything like this before. Yes, it's right, and all that. And you're giving a lecture in the original, where the photograph originated. You're giving 3 papers, one of them is the photograph. That's the dynamics. And that's what led my father to the high spirit of saying, well, my Creator, I salute you. You've done a beautiful job for me, not only for my life, but on the next generation, to have a young black person go to teach the Germans, to remind the Germans where mathematics comes from. I'm ready to go. That, you know what that did with me. I was extremely in a lot of pains when I came to see my father. Now, I didn't have a physical condition, but mine was a bond with my father. And understanding he had, this prostate that was not getting any response whatsoever. And Gagut hadn't come out with the truth of prostate then. And so I was just helpless and taking in his pain and adding to mine and having to try to deal with that combination. And thinking about what's going to happen eventually, especially after I had asked him to come on to the Sloan Kettering Center. And he said, hell no, he wasn't going there. And I'd done that earlier. I think it was 83 or 84. I'd come and I said, Dad, it's time to go to Sloan Kettering Center. And he tried to ridicule me and say, and that is owned by some brothers over there. And I said, no, not likely. So I see, and you want me to come over there? And he just ridiculed me, and but in the process, he got me to see what he was saying. I couldn't come in there. He saw the hospice idea before I did, obviously, because mine was overwhelmed by my pain to hear about his condition. When they announced, I saw his diagnosis way before I was told. I was here in Farmingdale, doing research for Fetch Out Republic, where I was helping, build a warplane called the A-10. Okay. And I was doing research and publishing papers, and a guy, Walter was the name of the individual in charge of the graphics for the whole, airplane company. And and they did my artwork and everything for my publication. They helped me accomplish the feat of publishing more than anybody else in the IAA journal.
Was he a brother, Walter?
No, he was English, I believe. He was non-black.
Yeah, any of those designs, anything, can we put our hands on them?
You mean the papers or?
Yes.
The paper, oh yeah, we could have reprints, reprints from the IAA. A lot of them were burnt during the firebombing of our campus facilities. But, so Walter, I was known to them because that was the graphic section of Fairchild, what the other word was known as Republic Aviation. Republic Aviation built A-10 and F-11 or something. The earlier versions, the statues of their airplanes in the Bowling Air Force Base and so on, they were well respected. They built some of the biggest, most sophisticated warplanes for America. And so now Walter was in charge, was the director of the graphics for the entire company. But because, I was very, very involved with the publishing, they saw me very frequently. As a matter of fact, they were detached from the main building of the company. They were on Route 110 near the airport, okay? And so I had to come out of the facility and walk to where they were located, okay? And so then Walter knew me very well. And one day I came in to see them, and he would delegate and give me the staff members who would do the artwork for me, drawings and plotting of the graphs and copying and all that. So Walter then called me and says, I have prostate problems. His was not cancerous, his was benign, but he had prostate problems, and he was in a lot of pains.
I can hear you.
Okay, and then so he began relaying the message to me, and and said, yes, he had prostate problems. And then I said, gee, I feel awful and everything, and eventually, and I asked him, what exactly is the prostate problem? Okay. And he explained to me that is my first experience in terms of finding out what a prostate is. I never knew what a prostate is, before then. So he explained and said, well, prostate, gave me the anatomy of prostate and so on and so forth, and how it can get enlarged and everything. That was the very first time I learned anything about prostate, at least in that dimension. It turned out, as Walter was introducing me to the prostate, that my father was being diagnosed as having a prostate cancer. Almost exactly the same time. So I was thoroughly amazed. I was, when he was telling me, I had no idea God was using Walter and his condition to tell me my father was being diagnosed with a prostate problem.
Okay, John.
And so God was able to reveal that to me. And later on, when the information would actually come formally, that in fact he was diagnosed with that condition, I inquired in terms of when the diagnosis occurred and so on and so forth, and from what I was told, it was exactly during the time, or very close to the time, where I was getting the information from Walter. Yeah. So anyway, so that set up some things for me. But so anyway, back to Germany. I internalized the news. I remember there was another colleague, whom I told about my father's condition, especially because they said it was cancerous. And he looked at me and he actually wept himself. He cried himself, because during those days, prostate cancer, this was in the early 80s. Prostate cancer diagnosis was like a death, a very, very serious thing and so on. So with that, I began to explore the way. I think the same year, of course, it must be the same year, 83, 84, I went home and tried to get my father, and it didn't work. So in 85, when I came home, he was really getting, much sicker and so on. But, and the pain and the fear of the possibility of him transforming on was overwhelming to me. But the lecture in Germany alleviated the depth and the weight of that, that burden on me. Because when I arrived, and it was a surprise, and it was in April, okay, I think maybe April 7th or somewhere there. And so I met my father, and once I gave him the story, and his spirit were skyrocketed up and everything. And when he made this statement, I said, well, you've made my life in terms of what you did in Germany. And so I'm no longer afraid, just like Reverend King. Longevity has its place. I'm not concerned anymore. That's basically what my father was saying to me. So that Reverend King's piece was what my father was really saying. He said, no. He says, the goal has been accomplished. Okay? As a people, we're going to get to the mountaintop, the promised land. But I'm not concerned anymore because that is guaranteed. That's going to happen. But in my father's case, he said, that is done already. The mountaintop was telling the German where mathematics came from. And he said, with 3 papers, we've done that. Son, so I'm ready to go. Now that took so much load off my chest because the feeling of having my father feeling the pain of death, not only the pain of the sickness, but the pain of death was minimized, was alleviated, was highly reduced when my father says he was prepared, he was now ready to transform on. That was quite a bit of accomplishment. The spiritual upliftment that occurred during that 1985 with what happened in Germany and what happened with, even on the flights, and what happened with my father, and coming back here and a lot of other things. So in 86, I'll come back to Nigeria to bury my father, and a lot more things were happening. I moved on to Brooklyn Poly, and then, yeah, it's gonna be, we're gonna move again. Oh, this is amazing. Okay, so you're gonna. But well, okay. Now, so we were talking about the photograph and the trip to Germany, and the impact on,
the build up over time to the surrender.
Yes, that's correct.
But there were other things that happened that also brought you into the kind of leadership that led to your being nominated for the Nobel Prize.
Right. First I was, so after 83, that automatically set me up for the award that will happen in 1989. Because after that was established, like I said, very notable MIT professors will, in their whole career, will brag about having 4 papers in the IAA journal, which is something that God did through me in 1 year, So it just was godly. Now, and especially with the German involvement in 1985. But before you see, in other words, the journey had many stages. the journey had many stages, and I'm glad that my mother was able to grant an interview where he actually reported what happened in the beginning in terms of the revelation that my sister, my older sister, who my mother was working very hard to keep her alive, and when the prophet saw her, actually, first of all, he was blind, so he couldn't see, but he could see without seeing physically. So he had a revelation that my sister was going to survive the problems, and then told my mother that the one that is coming after her will be bringing the God news to the world. My mother didn't really believe that, because, you know, what her focus was her daughter. But after Gagut was ordered, it didn't take too long, you know, before my mother had to acknowledge it was a play out of the revelation she was given by the prophet. And so that was also part of this whole dynamics. The revelation was done. In other words, the prophet said, I was going to be sent with a God order to the world, but didn't elaborate too much more beyond that. And that was way before I was even conceived. So then I come into this world a couple of months. I began to walk without crawling. And then my mother still didn't see anything. She saw it even more, almost like in a negative sense. Say, what kind of a weird child is this? Why is he walking without crawling? It almost, you understand, it was something to be, celebrated, but my mother kind of took on a negative, the other side of a, reaction to it. And a lot of other things that I did that were strange, or quote, considered strange. And kind of, at some point I had to go and stay on a ranch, because, well, especially when I began to explore what was going on in the river Niger, on the riverside, downtown and all that, where those days, that's what I was telling you, missed. If you brought in your camera, those days where the ship was coming from Liverpool and arriving in either port, I can begin to tell you, when you went in there, everything was in a different mode. That was the time I was growing up, and I was actually going there and meeting people. You understand me? Talking about 4 years, 3 years. I could go downtown, and by myself, and communicate with people from the diaspora and non-blacks and everybody else. It was really. But after the Kainji Dam, where the River Niger was no longer navigable, we lost that status. We were a big port on the River Niger. And so anyway, so my mother saw all that, and then the elementary school incident, I could feel something, but I wasn't so conscious of it. I could feel something in my system. Like I told you, the sculpture that I did, maybe at 2 years old or 2.5 years old, I still remember it. I could communicate with the sculpture of human beings and so on. I could communicate with them and all that. Then move on to elementary school and dealing with the elders, and so on, and hearing the history, and then moving on to St. Augustine there were a lot, every step of the way there were things that were very strange or very different from the norm. And then came on to Rensselaer, again, the whole thing continued in terms of uniqueness and, strange and different, and, But in 1985, that Germany thing was very, very, very highly spiritual. And I don't forget, almost every minute on the plane I still can remember today. Like I remember the music I was listening to. Part of it happened to Michael Jackson's music on the plane. But also a guy from Earth, Wind and Fire and some English act. I remember all those music, and having Easter in Germany before going to Nigeria. I remember all that. And then in 1986, of course, I had to go back to bury my father. Was another, one of the most painful points to me up until that point. And then move on to Polytechnic University, and again, another phase of different similar encounters. I remember the president of the school, Professor Bugliarello, going down to Washington, that's Brooklyn Polytechnic University, going to Washington for a president's meeting with the Department of Defense or whatever, and he came back with a photograph paper. One of my photograph papers. Actually, that came in later. And with a different print, a print that I think is the intelligence community print. It was different from the ARAA print, and he handed it over to me and did not say much. I knew where it came from, Department of Defense, intelligence, and so on. So all that were happening. But in 1989, when I was awarded the fellowship, the associate fellowship, things began to, switch gears at such a heavy, powerful, godly rate. I had to cope up. I had to, reach out to God to gather enough energy and spirituality and godliness not to deal with it, because Gagut was on the verge of announcement in 1989 when that was, and I think they knew that was coming, at least spiritually, in terms of the scientific community in general. So come 1990, I began to get involved with communications with Cambridge University in terms of the review of the preliminaries of Gagut, like turbulence solutions, things that people never thought was going to be possible. And that was part of how a very violent, not physically, but mentally violent encounters with Cambridge. The early 90s. I remember Stephen Hawking had just made an announcement in A Brief History of Time in 1991 and said the search for unified field theory was an absolute impossibility because he doesn't see God permitting a creature to go into God's mind to see what was on God's mind when God was creating the universe. But the Gagut had already happened in 1990, 1 year before the Brief History of Time in 1991. And in the middle of that, in the review, because I had to send out some of this work. In 1992, for example, I was in in Copper Mountains, you know, where the first open review of Gagut really occurred. It was 1992. And there were a lot of legendary mathematicians there, including one from University of Amsterdam. They're called Diega. I used to call him Dijaga, but they pronounced it. I didn't realize the name was spelled. It was pronounced Diega. An older guy, a math professor, and you know, so that, and then the Russian delegation, just like the previous generation, I mean the delegation from Israel, they had a similar setup. And they came over to me and overwhelmed me again, just like happened in Germany. This time it was here in America at Copper Mountain. And they invited me to Russia and all that. So I knew something was happening. Eventually, in 1994, a conference was planned. We were planning, and one of my helpers was my brother, the medical doctor, Dr. Musa, and he was supposed to be helping me coordinate people from Nigeria. I wanted to invite one of my teachers, really, from Rensselaer, a black man. I had mentioned him before, Professor John Amazigo. Professor Amazigo was a professor at Rensselaer while I was there, but had left just before I left. He had left for Nigeria because he was giving the chairmanship of the math department at the University of Nigeria at Nsukka with a full professorship, something he wasn't able to get at Rensselaer, where I was, because he was black, because he had a PhD in mathematics from Harvard University, so he can't do better than that in terms of credentials. But he was still an associate professor. So when they offered him full professorship in Nigeria, he took that on and ran with it. So by 1994, he was located in Nigeria. And I wanted my brother, Dr. Musa, to actually connect with him and try to invite him to attend the briefing. You know, there were only very few black people I could invite to the briefing in Troy, and he was one of them, you know. But the pain and the sadness was my brother's condition had gotten so bad that I could feel it, even though I wasn't there looking at him. I could feel it that he wasn't well, you know, because I could see from his emotions, his, you know, lack of interest, you know, apparent lack of interest, which really was. Otherwise, ordinarily, he would be so delighted and so on, but the sickness wouldn't allow him to express that. So I was feeling all that pain. Eventually, it wasn't too long before they assassinated him on the 30th of November, 1994. We were in the middle of planning the conference, which I was dedicating to one of my teachers, Professor George Handelman, the guy who was credited to have introduced applied mathematics to America from Brown University. So I had to stop that process, the planning of the conference, which Musa, my brother, and my Leslie, and I really coordinated it, you know. That brought in together the big legends in mathematics that were alive then in Troy. And Gagut was presented, you know, in their presence and challenged them to actually, you know, but it happened in March 24th to March 25, 1995. And I think that played a major role because with the former head of math department from Stanford University, another former head of math department was Caltech in attendance, and people like former head of math department from Brown University, and then Lee Siegel, a legend in mathematical biology, and a PhD from MIT in mathematics and all that. All these legends, and then I've forgotten the guy from Caltech, you know, currently. So there were all these legends in there. So God ordered Gagut presented. If Gagut had any problem, those ones will see, including my own teacher, Professor George Handelman. All I remember them was they were holding their jaws watching the Gagut presentation in Troy, New York, in a big hall. And Professor Luchins was there. Professor Lebreski was there. They were all, oh, definitely, they were in the conference. Everybody or somebody was there that we could get hold of in a short notice. So the loss of my brother translated into that encounter. But it was, up until that point, the most painful loss I've ever had. I remember coming back from his burial on Christmas Eve. In other words, I left December, actually, well, I left, December 3rd or so for his burial, and I returned December 20, I was in a plane for the Christmas, really. But in Nigeria, it was December 24th, Christmas Eve. And I remember walking, into the airport, and people were in party mode and everything else. And I had my brother drive, my younger brother, but older than my one that had just transformed, drive his car. His car was an old Peugeot. My brother's car was a Peugeot, but he was planning to buy a Mercedes just before the incident happened. And so anyway, drove, and then we entered the airport, and everything was happening, and I could barely grasp in terms of they put a chain on the car. And then but as soon as I walked in, there were women who were celebrating the Christmas Eve, partying and dancing and so on and so forth. And one of them, or a couple of them, looked at me, and they read my pain right in my face. They read my soul right in my face, and one of them not only was taken by that, but almost to the point of being angry at me by what she saw and read in my face. That she confronted me. And she said to me, he says, what in the world can make you this sad? She said, you see everybody partying, and how could you be so deeply sad? What in the world can possibly make a human being sad like you are? And I looked at her and I said, wow. I had no idea she could read me that much. They gave me a form to fill out, and you understand me? I began filling the form out, and I realized I'd made a mistake, and I squeezed up the thing and put it in my pocket. Okay, ah man, and so anyway, after she said this to me, I kind of took notice and said, wow. I had no idea the world is, and she wasn't even in the burial, and she really didn't, and the only answer I gave offered that was, I said, if only you knew what happened to me, perhaps you would understand. And I left it like that. So then what happened then was, I squeezed, I began to fill out one, I wrote everything, and I reached a point I realized there was a mistake, so I put it in my pocket. When I arrived here, after maybe a couple of days or a week or so, where I had kind of, began to, withdraw from those horrors a little bit, just a little bit. I read what I wrote and I couldn't believe. If you understand, if anybody told me I wrote it, I wouldn't believe it, because not only did it not make sense what I was writing on the paper, it was so disjointed and so disconnected. And so again, it gave me a sense, beside this woman reading me what was going on in my system, I read me through what I wrote in those pages. It was a form I had to fill out. Anyway, but 1994 was a tremendous year in terms of the loss and everything. But it was also, at the same time, the dynamics of Gagut was going on. It was during that time, after the presentation, 3 months later, after burying my brother, or 4 months later, Clinton, obviously, they must have consulted all those who were there live, all the mathematicians that were there live to witness the thing. I remember Leslie and children walking past Professor Lee Siegel and Professor, I think it starts with a G, from, anyway. They were discussing about my presentation, but they didn't hear the details, but they heard my name and so on and so forth. So the thing became a talk for every mathematician. Eventually, the presentation was published and so on and so forth. But Clinton came to a realization that the implication of Gagut was a revelation of the understanding, total understanding of the totality of the reality, automatically was God endowing me with the ultimate understanding, as in ultimate intelligence that cannot be surpassed. And that the people who did immediate evaluation are the people who attended this briefing. So they came to a realization, well, it's footless, futile kind of exercise to do it. There's nothing that could be done because it's an equation. That's another way. An exact equation is a God order, like 2 + 1 is equal to 3 is a God order. You can't touch that. You can't. That's how Gagut came out.
Now, we were talking about reviews, and I wanted you to go over the reviews, because people have said that those reviews are not really reviews. Those are just automatic reviews, something to that effect, that they are automatic writings done by a committee, which means that they read them, but it's not a review.
Yeah. Well, you had given me a package earlier, and I think somebody must have taken it, but I would have shown you some of the names of the reviewers. You could focus, you could put them in later probably. Yeah, there was Yom Karo. There was, quite a few of them, all of them legends. There was, Russians, Konkin, for example. Konkin was a Russian who rub shoulders with people like Sir James Lighthill that I told you earlier about. Conkin is in that class because we have a conference where Conkin, be careful. Conkin was attending the same session of a conference with Sir James Lighthill. So he's in that class. He reviewed it, but the one that in terms of pure mathematics was the most legendary of them all was Sargas, Professor Gagut. Yes, Professor Gregory Sargas. And the review was very consistent with the kind of elegance that only God can provide in that kind of environment. Okay, you want me to come further?
Yes, you can. I just want to make sure you're out of the rain.
Yeah. Because the rain was
Are
up
you
there.
comfortable?
Yeah, I'm. It's a lot better now. Okay. Now, so before you understand what the review represents, you have to understand
Who the reviewers are.
that's absolutely correct. That, as a matter of fact, that single-handedly tells you whether the nature of the review. Corot definitely is in the very, very high class of pure mathematicians, or people they call geometers, And Conkin might be called applied in the sense that he has turbulence and aeronautics leanings. But the one in terms of pure mathematics that is in a class in pure mathematics by himself is Gregory Sargas. That underscores the classifications of Gagut as being the ultimate mathematics, because Gregory Sargas has the credentials that you understand is so there are very few people who can match it. Here is a man that has been reviewed over 200 times by the American Mathematical Society. In other words, he has contributed research work in his lifetime that were considered significant enough to be reviewed by the American Mathematical Society for over 200 times. That's Gregory Sargas. And he's a geometer. As a matter of fact, he was the president of the Balkan Association of Geometers. Balkan, the Greeks and the countries in that general area, Serbia and all that. Which is a very prestigious position. But when you look up the American Mathematical Society reviews called MRs, Mathematical Reviews, they're supposed to review math work that is significant enough to get attention of the top mathematicians. That's what is reviewed generally. Now, in his case, he has had over 200 of that kind of work. The only other person, who is much older than him with that kind of, that I know, was Albert Einstein. Okay, and so, I mean, Albert Einstein is old enough to have him as a grandson, maybe, okay? You know, anyway, now he was the one that was selected to review Gagut. That says it all. Later on, the guy who sat in Newton's chair in Cambridge, the other Newton chair, meaning the master of Trinity College, Professor Sir Professor Tia, once he found out Gagut was reviewed by Sagas, whom he knew to be a legend in mathematics, he asked to see it because he couldn't believe Gagut was reviewed by Sagas. And once he verified it, he was amazed. So now, all you need to know in terms of the integrity of the review of Gagut, integrity and the review of Gagut, is that Sagas reviewed Gagut. That's all that you need to know. And on that note, you can go and do your own research on Gregory Sagas. Now, in addition, Yom Kippur also reviewed it, and Yom Kippur took my abstract. Usually, a review is supposed to determine, normally, first of all, before you review it by the American Mathematical Society, AMS, you have to have gone through so many layers of reviews before that. You have to be published in a journal before you review. And to be published in a journal means you have to go through very rigorous reviews, okay, for you to be published. Now, it is only after you have been published in a reputable journal, that means you have gone through a lot of reviews, and especially if you're dealing with a big claim, you have to have gone through that already to be published. Now, it is after that where the committee of the American Mathematical Society will go through those journals and find out which publications are likely to even attract any further review by American Mathematical Society. And so if you are picked up as one of those, it is after that you will then be looked at and reviewed again after the formal reviews to be published. You will now go through a review by the committee. And the committees, although they're not all experts in any particular field, they have a fundamental basic understanding of things. And if your contribution is either understood well enough, okay, or they happen to have an expert on the committee in your field, okay, that expert within the committee would certify your review, and they will summarize how they feel about the review. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Now, if they do not summarize their review, and what will happen is, if your claim is not outlandish, okay, and they're convinced what you wrote in your abstract is okay, do you understand? Mm-hmm. But on the basis that, yes, what you said you did is not a large claim, but you are correct in your claim, okay? Mm-hmm. And there is nothing they could add to your abstract. If they agree totally with your abstract, they will send out your abstract. That is the greatest honor you can ever get. In other words, that what you claim in your abstract is accepted whole scale, wholesome. In other words, totally. That's the best you could ask for. Because most people usually will go beyond, they will exaggerate. If you exaggerate, the job of a reviewer will be to take out your exaggeration and then concentrate on the part they can verify was true. Do you understand?
Yes.
So they isolate the part they believe is true out of your exaggerated version and put it out as their review. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. So therefore, if they take your total abstract and paste it as their position, do you understand? Mm-hmm. Then that's the greatest review you can ever get. Mm-hmm. Now, but then the next thing will be, it means they have certified that you've told the truth about what you did. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Now, by and large, such reviews are reviews that are, not very substantial claims. Do you understand? They're not big claims. So they will say, okay, you said you take the current status of things and you push it by a few inches. And that's what you said in your abstract. We agree that's what you did. That will be the nature of that review. Now, if you had exaggerated or, put anywhere, so they will extract what they believe is the essence of what you've done and put it out. That will be another kind of review. Do you understand? Now, so therefore, in my case, it went past the committee. They actually delegated Yom Karo, which is a top expert in the field of differential geometry.
What was he reviewing?
He was reviewing Gagut as a topic in differential geometry. Mm-hmm. And he looked at all that the claim, which was embodied in my abstract. You saw it. You saw it here, so that's what you were showing me earlier. He took that abstract and left it verbatim, but signed off his name on it. That means not only did he agree, see what was done was perfectly correct, but the statement of what was done, he also totally agreed with it. He didn't alter any word in the abstract. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. And as I said before, that's the ultimate review you can expect from a reviewer. Now, but in the abstract was indicated what was done in the work, which is the generalized proof of Einstein's theorem used in the new group theory. Okay? But the generalized proof proved Einstein was right in terms of concluding that mass can transform into energy through a transformation. I would call it transformation. That had a consequence. In mathematics or mathematical physics, people will write conservation equations. That will be a conservation dynamics. That mass can transform into energy. So if you write, in other words, if you know the geometry of energy, that means automatically by transformation you know the geometry of mass. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. That's what the transformation implies. So the new group theory was used not only to verify that mass can transform into energy, but it also verified that mass can transform into momentum and that energy can transform into momentum. It's not just energy transforming into mass, but also to momentum. And mass can transform into momentum as well as energy. And thereby, Einstein was able to reduce the conservation equations, as was known in mathematical physics, from 5 equations, which is, in the three-dimensional space, you have a mass conservation, 3 momentum conservations, and 1 energy conservation. That is traditionally known to be the number of conservations that come out. But there were 5 different equations. So when Einstein unified mass and energy, Einstein was able to eliminate one of the 5 equations because you can make your choice between energy and mass. Once you've written one equation for that, it automatically takes care of the other. You understand? So instead of 5 equations, Einstein was able to reduce the equation from 5 to 4 with the unification of mass and energy. What happened then after proving Einstein's theorem or theory using the no group theory was that energy could not only transform to mass, it can transform to momentum and vice versa. So therefore, equation went from 4, where Einstein left it, into 1. Equation becomes 1. And because it's 1, it becomes a unified equation because that one speaks for the rest of the 5. And the physicists had always thought within those 5 equations, mass, momentum, and energy, you've captured most of the physics world. Therefore, and Einstein managed to transform that into 4 equations. By reducing it to 1, you've unified the whole physics in that one equation, and therefore it becomes clearly what Einstein was looking for, the unified field theory. But that phase of it, in terms of physical application, was not focused on because it was done purely, even though momentum and masses and terminologies were used, the focus was on the geometry, what is called the invariance, conformal invariance of mapping, which is part of a differential geometry, where Sagas and Yom Kuro and others were the top experts. Do you understand? So once that was verified, means that the unified field theorem and its less accurate version, theory, has been verified mathematically. Once you've verified a theorem, a theory will have to fall in wherever it is supposed to be correct, or it becomes totally unnecessary. Who needs a theory when there's a theorem, right? So once you've done the theorem, right, that's an additional unbelievability of Gagut, where people were looking for theory. God came up as expected. That's how you know it came from God, is because it came out as a theorem. Theorem is the only language God speaks. Do you understand? God does not speak theory. Okay? So that was the proof it came from God, because it came out as a theorem. The truth about everything came out as a theorem, meaning it was God, the God order. That is what we're trying to articulate right now. So with that proven, Jim Crow had no choice but to deal with it. In other words, that was another way of saying God's self ordained me with ultimate understanding of reality, all of reality. Which is another way of saying God ordained me with ultimate intelligence, etas of infinity, mathematically. And therefore, and that because black people share my genes, it's another way of saying God have reordained the black race as the most intelligent race. And since everything we buy is a product of intelligence, if you are the most intelligent, it means that you could produce everything that we buy. And thereby, you become and sell all that, means you are the richest race. And because intelligence is the biggest part of any military operation, the guns and the bombs are designed by intelligence, and in terms of logistics and the operations of the military system, it is intelligence that takes care of that business. Therefore, for you to be a military power, you have to be extremely intelligent, or have people that are working that are intelligent. So therefore, being most intelligent is also associated with being the most powerful race. Do you understand?
Yes.
So therefore, this was what Jim Crow woke up to in 1990, and in a few years beyond that point, and came to a conclusion with the President of the United States and giving money to Yale University and asking Yale to check what that means in terms of its implication for the rest of the race, or the races, rest of the human race, which is the non-blacks. And so they were giving money to test out Gagut. Since Oyibo's intelligence infallibly correct as being ultimate intelligence, what does that do? What does that mean for the rest of the non-blacks, or the rest of the races, the non-blacks? And so they went into the lab. Unlike the previous attempts before Gagut, because of Gagut, they couldn't allow Jim Crow to play a role in that experiment. They have to, in their own words, eliminate Jim Crow in terms of eliminating the so-called European bias. European bias is another term for Jim Crow, that obstructs the truth in order to keep black people suffering or misrepresent their reality. So after that was done, they went into the lab and measured, something that is basically a dilated form of N, which is the level of intelligence. The N, in other words, eta sub N is GNJ. X to XJ to power N to plus 1. That is the formula for intelligence. That's the exact formula for intelligence. And my N is the level of intelligence. My N is infinity. So therefore, that's what makes it ultimate. So any mathematician can see that. Maybe not any mathematician. Brilliant mathematicians can understand that. Because that's a mapping. That's what intelligence is. Your eyes map a picture. Your camera maps a picture to be snapped. That's how you see the reality that you map. So intelligence is mapping. So when you have eta sub N is the totality of all mapping possible. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. With N being the indicator of the level of the mapping. Even you that are not geometrical in terms of you really understand, you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. Because you could perceive your camera as mapping my reality into the picture right now. That's how you get a sense of my reality. That's what intelligence does. Intelligence maps reality onto the brain to be interpreted so you can understand it. So therefore, intelligence is about mapping. You can understand that, can't you? Okay, now, eta sub N is all the possible mappings. Eta sub N is a mapping formula. And the N is the degree of that mapping. As in, if mapping is represented by eta sub N, and mapping is intelligence or act of understanding, and then we indicate the level of that understanding or the level of intelligence. Do you understand? All right. For me, the N is the totality, that is infinite. So therefore, that's where the ultimate intelligence, you can't go past that. So with that pieces of intelligent units, I can understand everything. Now, that's what was clear to Jim Crow in the middle of the 90s as my brother was being assassinated. 1995. But it became extremely clear. Now then, Jim Crow and company were already reviewing the Gagut already. Because his review came out, I believe, in 1997. They were poring over it from the early 90s and finally reviewed it in 1997. And 1998 and 1998, all the reviews were going on. Anyway, and Sagas did also. So it was this infallible nature of the God order, ordaining a black man with ultimate intelligence, and ethos of infinity, and because the rest of the black people, his race, shared his genes immediately with him. That is how God redeclared the black race as the most intelligent race, the richest race, and the most powerful race, and as therefore as the chosen race. So it is that order that became clear, the God order, that knocked out the whole idea of New World Order and all the other BS. It became the final order, the first, the only, and the final order. So now they went into the labs to test out N. They didn't know the formula of intelligence before Gagut. So they were using the DNAs and all that, trying to correlate a few things. But the DNA, in effect, was measuring that level of intelligence, how much the level of intelligence, N in the eta sub N. So they were woken up to the real definition of intelligence in eta sub N, and that N becomes the level of that intelligence. And if you understand geometry, we could show you that nicely and so on. And just like you can get the sense, a camera, your eye is like, it's like a camera. So it transforms reality into the brains through the lenses and so on, into the brains. That's what the camera does. So therefore, what the brain sees, therefore, is like what you capture on the camera. That's how the brain understands reality. Do you understand? So therefore, you then get a sense that if a camera transforms and the eye transforms reality to be interpreted by the brains which constitute understanding, then you can see how a transformation formula is a measure of abilities to express intelligence or show understanding. Yeah, because, see, you share your understanding of reality by the pictures you're taking right now with somebody that's in thousands of miles away. When you meet with them or send them by post, they will take, because you will help them see reality and understand reality through the picture that you're taking. So anyway, that was obvious. So they went into the lab and they measured an equivalent of 28 for the black race of the level of intelligence for black people. While for them, the non-blacks, they measured 19. And the question that you were asking before is, that is, they say, in other words, we in Gagut, in this university, have to give you those figures. But somebody can interpret it, because everything is relative, really. The only entity that's absolute is God. Everything else is relative. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Now, in that relative term, 28 intelligent level for black people as compared to 19 intelligence level for black people.
For white people?
For the non-blacks, yes, white and non-Asians and company. They have 19 level of intelligence. N is equivalent. N will be 19. That is a raw figure. Now, because it's relative, you could say, okay, what you're really interested in is how does non-blacks compare with black people? That's really what you're interested in. So the comparison is 28 for black people to 19 for the non-blacks. That's how they compare. So their relativity is 28 compared to 19. Do you understand? It's important that you pay attention, because you were asking a question before. All right.
Yeah, the question was in terms of the University of Gagut surrendering,
yes,
for symbolically for the European world and passing the baton to
no, I'm getting to that. I just want to clear the point about how did they, because we're still in Yale. Yale happened, ironically, before Göttingen. Although Göttingen was behind, was way ahead of everybody. But we're Yale, meanwhile. And you need to see, because the figures you hear from Yale seem to say 9 to 6, a ratio of 9 to 6. The key word is a ratio. Mm-hmm. A ratio can be presented in more than one form. Mm-hmm. Everything's relative. A ratio is a relative measure. Mm-hmm. Okay, so therefore, the raw figure says 28 compared to 19. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Or 28, or divided by 19, or 28 for blacks, 19 for the non-blacks. That is equivalent. You can multiply that number by any number, and it will still be all right. That's part of the conformal invariance, because you're giving a relative figure for both things. Do you understand me? It's the same basis. You could print the picture that you're drawing on any scale, provided everything is proportional. Do you understand?
Right.
You could print it on 8.5 by 11, or you could print it on smaller figures, 5 by 2, for example. You could do that, or on another side, 100 by 100. If you could spread that kind of way, you could do that. If every bit of it are proportionate, they will still give the same picture. Do you understand?
Right.
That's what relativity means. That's what comparison is about. So think of it as, on a larger scale, it is 28 compared to 19.
Right.
On a smaller scale,
6
or 9 compared to 6. That's what that is. But how do you prove they are proportional? The proportionality comes in 9 to 6 is equivalent to 28 to 6, because you could divide the 28 not to 6, 28 to 19. You could divide both the 28 by 3. If you divide 28 by 3, you get 9 1/3. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Okay. If you divide 19 by 3, you would get 6 1/3. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. So the figure that you heard people use come out of that, dividing the figure that I have by 3. If you divide 28 by 3, you get 9 1/3. And 1/3 is 0.33. So if you round it up, it will become the 9 1/3 becomes 9 if you round it up. Do you understand?
Yes.
So that's where you got the 9 for the black people from. It comes from the 28 divided by 3. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. And the 19 is also from there, divided by 3, you also get 6 1/3, which is also rounded up will be 6. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Okay, but I have to give it in the raw figure, because that's given directly in the abstract. Do you understand? And I know how it was obtained in the abstract. Do you understand?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so but I can reduce it to your reading as interpreted to you by a presenter or whatever. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. But the original way it came out in research is 28 compared to 7. So it was Gagut and the verification of Gagut as coming from God that forced Yale to come up with that conclusion. Do you understand?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So then, less than 8 years later, less than 7 plus 5, actually, that was done in 1996, 1997. It was published. So 7 years later on, a cryptic message will come around, which is important.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Cryptic message came from an intelligent American group called Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness.
Right.
Which is a big player. The intelligence community is a big player in what goes on in America. They are the ones that maintain all German presidents up until Gagut. It was the intelligence community, because they have to convince the world. They dictated to by intelligence, which is the biggest attribute of God. They do business here on the basis of intelligence, is the impression they give to the world.